Welcome to Groove Portia, the podcast that uncovers the hidden treasures within grief. I'm your host, Portia the producer, and I'm inviting you to join me on a transformative journey where we will exchange laughter, of course the best medicine of them all, reflect on cherished memories. Remember that time that the little boy grabbed my hand instead of his mother's at the amusement park? Yikes. And of course, discover gratitude while navigating one of life's hardest challenges, loss. So get ready to groove with me, Portia the producer. Let's dive in. Welcome back to Groove Portia, everybody. I am your host and executive producer, Portia the producer. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to keep up with the latest and greatest of all Groove with Portia. So today I am joined by an individual who offers what I call a unique perspective on how grief intersects with legal matters while also bringing a compassionate approach to every single case. So welcome, legal nurse consultant and founder of Crawford Legal Nurse Consulting, Miss Crystal Crawford herself. How you doing today, Crystal?
I'm doing great, Portia. How are you?
Living the dream, Crystal. Every day is great that ends in Y. And so, Crystal, for the audience who is tuning in, what are you grateful for today?
Oh, I wake up trying to be grateful for a few things. I'm grateful for every day. My family, my husband, my dog, and just being able to wake up and do what I do and to be able to walk and breathe. Grateful for all of that.
You know, Crystal, it's always those what we call little things. But as we both know, it's the little things that help us to find gratitude in the bigger things, right? When our business really starts to take off on a global scale, or when somebody from a big national company recognizes our business on their platform. So it definitely starts with family, having a roof over our head, having a support network, right? Because as me and you both know, being entrepreneurs, that support system is what I call the life jacket of our lifeline to really succeed or sink as an entrepreneur. And Crystal, before we jump into the conversation, for our audience who may not be familiar with the term legal nurse consulting, can you really describe to us what a legal nurse consulting is and what you do to be of service to the world?
Okay, yeah. So legal nurse consulting, you're right, is not well known. I have over 22 years of nursing background in OB and NRP, which is neonatal resuscitation, and NICU. And because of my experience doing that, I can review charts for attorneys, and they'll ask me to point out some gaps in care, if any care was below the standard of care. And I'll review those cases and come back with the attorney with reports and help them move on in their case and either defending healthcare workers or litigating for those families who have losses.
And thank you so much, Crystal, for shedding light on that, because I think, again, legal nurse consulting is somewhat of a newer term in because I know when I first saw it, I'm like, a legal nurse consultant. It had me interested, like, oh my God, what does she do? How does it work? And so, Crystal, now that you are a full-time entrepreneur, right? You started in the mainstream healthcare system, and I think that you kind of still do some contract work there. Can you maybe shed some light, Crystal, on the journey, the grief journey, right, that you've experienced transitioning into full-time entrepreneurship? Because let's be realistic, when we think of nurses, we always think of healthcare, hospice. Maybe you don't really think of a nurse in their own private practice. Can you elaborate on the grief journey that you've experienced making that pivot to entrepreneurship?
Yeah, well, I am still full-time at the bedside. This is something that I'm journeying into, and as maybe a transition more away from the bedside as I move forward in my entrepreneurship. But there has been elements of grieving and elements of sadness that I've had in doing this, because when I started out as a nurse, I felt like I was going to be one of those old ladies pushing the carts down the hallway serving my patients. Um, but at healthcare changes, it evolves. A lot of that change has been really good. However, as it's evolved, especially through COVID, I see that it's trending towards a concern of how healthcare is going to be heading to. So in seeing that, it has caused me to take a pause and realize, I don't know if I see myself doing this for the rest of my life. I don't know. I can say that I want to retire being a full-time bedside nurse. Now, some of that is because of the changes. And some of that is because I have evolved myself. Nursing is so taxing, especially if you're a good nurse and you really want to take care of these patients. It can empty your tank almost every single day. You are a patient representative, you're a patient advocate. We have to be concerned if the patients are happy or their families are happy. We have to serve the physicians, we have to serve administration. And let's be honest, pizza parties don't cut it, right? So, a lot of people have that ability to give, and that's part of what replenishes their soul. However, I have to have a balance, and moving forward and doing this for so long, that balance is a little out of whack. So I need to serve myself and, consider what would I do better at? What would fill me up moving forward in my career? And so that was a part of my grief journey, is realizing, man, I I don't think I can do this forever.
Krista, you brought up a really, really good point about how nursing in all fields, right, can be so emotionally taxing on not just you as the caregiver, but also the person who you're taking care of as well. And I agree, the pizza parties are, kind of a little old and redundant, right?
Yeah.
And I'm curious, Crystal, how are you able to, in a sense, cope with the grief of these different transitions, right? And also, how do you replenish your own cup every single day when it's a unique experience you're going to have per patient that you're taking care of?
Right. So I find the little joys at work for sure. I still love interacting with my families and with the babies I take care of. Outside of and also interacting with my coworkers, of course, and I have a fortunate um, position to be with a really great team. So we do lean on each other and crack up and crack jokes. But outside of work, when I'm feeling drained, I do allow myself to have those feelings. I do recognize, okay, I'm just not at 100 right now. And sometimes I do tell my husband when I get home, especially if I work back-to-back shifts for 3 days in a row, I'll tell him, like, I have nothing to give tonight. I just need a shower and bedtime. And he's so, supportive of that and gives me that time. And so outside of that, I also focus on my hobbies. I love to get outdoors, whether it's take my dog for a walk or kayak or bike. My husband and I just got new e-scooters, and that's so much fun because we have a great trail here in Greenville, South Carolina, that we can take these scooters on and focus on my hobbies, which, I'm a DIYer, so I got 10 hobbies at a time. So getting out of that nurse mentality and doing some self-care. Some days it might be just watching some trash TV too.
Hey, you know what? Good old trash TV, good old just pure random Roger Rabbit or whatever comedic special that's on a marathon. I feel it. I definitely feel it because I love how you brought this up, Crystal, because self care is so essential for grief.
Mm-hmm.
And can you shed light, Crystal, on maybe some tips or strategies for families who are navigating these complex emotions, dealing with legal cases related to your specialty, and obviously working with babies, birth injuries, and complex neonatal care?
Right. So these families that are seeking legal representation for their family member, whether it be a baby or a mom that had adverse outcomes, they're in a very, very unique situation in trying to find out what happened and seeing if there can be a catalyst for change, right? So that's very, very difficult for family to go through because they're are traumatized by just the mere events that happened. And then when you seek representation and you go through that process, and it can be a 2 or 3 year process for some of these families, they are re-traumatized. Um, so, and then opposite, when nurses are brought into cases like that, we're questioned, we're deposed, our our records are gone through with a fine-tooth comb, and we have to answer for that. And when you may have had that baby, or you may have had it 3 difficult days, and on that third day, maybe you just didn't chart something because you're overwhelmed, and that comes back. And so there's a grief process on both sides. Um, so I would suggest, if you're a person of faith, lean into that. It always helps me. As sometimes I'll wake up 10 minutes early before my alarm goes off. As frustrating as that is, I'm just laying there and I'm kind of like, I need to take this opportunity to come from a place of gratitude, maybe say a little prayer, and to bless my day and bless my hands, and that sets my day off so much better. So those who are going through this process, that faith can be very, very important and so helpful in navigating those 2, 3 years that you might have in resolving the case. Also, it's my intent is to create joy in my life. I don't think joy is something that is passive and it just comes. I think it's an intention. I think you have to create joy. There's a lot of time in between court hearings and gathering documents, and it's back and forth and 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And to go through that drudge without having joy in your life, it can really wear one down. So create that joy in your life, whether it's a vacation or, family reunions, celebrate birthdays, the small wins. That's important. And find purpose in the pain. You have to not let this be in vain. So, and that looks different to anyone. If you're a health professional, you can use the experience to better yourself at your profession, learn some modules, teach a class, teach your staff, like you have monthly staff meetings. Maybe take 20 minutes of that staff meeting, say, hey, this is what I learned in my experience. If you're a family, support a cause, March of Dimes. There's tons of cancer walks. It doesn't have to be on a huge congressional level. It can just be local support systems that you can help provide other families. Write your local representatives. Join, there is a great website called Meetups. You can search for a meetup group that shares your experience. And there's a lot of healing in that.
Crystal, what I just loved is how you really gave us so many key action steps that a lot of us have been, heard over our whole life. Number one, finding joy. Number two, leaning in on our faith. Because I can tell you, if I wasn't leaning in on my faith, I don't think we'd be having this conversation right now. I'd be still
Likewise.
under all my covers, still crying myself a river, watching the water just slowly rise up in my bed, and I'm just
Mhm.
floating, in outer space type of thing,
And you
right?
float before you realize you're floating.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then
You don't
converting
see it
that,
coming.
yeah, 100%, 100%. And then converting your pain to purpose. I know we've all heard that at some point in our journey when a tragedy happens, right? But
Mm-hmm.
we're so engulfed by the emotional turmoil that it's hard for us to really see what I call the hidden gift in the grief.
Mm-hmm.
Crystal,
Absolutely.
for our audience who is tuning in, before we jump into the next part of the conversation, if they want to connect with you and learn more about your work, is there a website or social media handle you can share with us today?
Absolutely. I'm on LinkedIn at Crawford Legal Nurse Consulting, and you can reach me there or on my website, www.crawfordlegalnurseconsulting.com.
Excellent. So for our audience, you can definitely connect with Crystal and, learn more about what she does as a legal nurse consultant and really get an
Mm-hmm.
idea of how this is so needed, right? I think that's the unique part of this entrepreneurial wave that we're going through, is how there's different individuals like yourself, Crystal, who have taken their skills, their passion for being a nurse, working with children and that, and kind of pivoting that, right? And Crystal, for
Yeah.
you, what did it take for you to really see the opportunity, right? Because I think sometimes we're so focused on one part of our skill set and our journey that we're not always able to see the big picture. Like, I know for me, being a former TV producer, I thought that's what I was always going to do, was level up the
Mm-hmm.
corporate ladder, until one day when I got the opportunity to create my own show, Grew Up Portia. Then I started to see, oh, I don't not only just host my own show, I can help other people to
Mm-hmm.
create their own shows and host them and that whole thing. So what would you say, Crystal, was that open door for you to see the opportunity through the obstacle?
Yeah. So, no one knows a chart like a nurse. We are investigators without even knowing we're investigators. And I mean, you get a sketchy patient, we're going to find out what's going on. We're going to get to the bottom of it. And, it's interesting. So, the idea came from my best friend who is a paralegal, and she worked with initially a public defender, and then went into a, a firm that did medical malpractice. And so she was seeing these nurses, look over cases. And this is my best friend from childhood. And she called me. She's like, "You got to do this. You got to do this. This, come on, like you need to do this." And so that was years ago, probably 10 years ago, she was telling me about this. And so it was a little seed that over time, I started getting used to the idea, and then also realizing I wasn't getting, I don't like to say I was getting burnt out at the bedside. I don't feel burnout. I feel like I've maybe outgrown it. So as I've outgrown nursing, bedside nursing, I have over time just repeatedly gone back to this idea. And then I started taking a small, like, professional course, a certificate course. And then I started looking more into national organizations. And then I got their professional course. And then I applied for my LLC, and I'm doing the thing.
I love, Crystal, how you really highlighted that point of being, of outgrowing something, right? I
Mm-hmm.
think we all reach that at some point in our career endeavors, right? I can
Right.
say for me, when I was a television producer, I think I mastered the job in 2 weeks, I think.
Wow.
And it just, for me, because it's very hands on when you're a producer. Obviously, you're stacking the rundown, you're pulling whatever stories from the wires that are going to be, depending on what shift you work, whether you're day side, night side, midday, whatever. You're pulling stuff from the wires. Sometimes it's just stuff that broke overnight or whatever. And you're just putting into the rundown, stacking it for whatever newscast you work. And then while the newscast is running, depending on if you're in the actual studio, you're running the teleprompter, adding in graphics, cueing the anchors for whatever their next segment is. So I mastered it in such a quick time, but it just felt that there was more. I knew there was more, but I couldn't put my finger on what more meant. Like I found joy and satisfaction in it, but I'm like, but there's more. My joy cup is not being filled all the way. There's just a little drop or two that's being added in here, but I know that there's more that I want to do, more that I want to explore. So I can relate to that outgrowing feeling. And so, Crystal, for our audience who are tuning in, right, if they're in that boat of they love what they do, but they feel that they've hit a peak, what tip can you leave with them to take that outgrowing, like that they're stuck, and convert it into an opportunity for them?
Right. Yeah. And I've experienced that a lot. And I've seen in the past coworkers who just do it because that they feel it's their only option. They've already done it for so long. It's what they know. That's it. It's not a great place to be. I feel that once you're comfortable I think that comfort leads to complacency, and that's where the danger can lie with us nurses at the bedside. And then it leads into, mistakes. And I don't ever want to be complacent. Unfortunately, change requires you to be uncomfortable. And when you're uncomfortable, it's probably the right thing. I'm so uncomfortable. I'm working on 3 cases right now and I'm uncomfortable with it. But that discomfort is leading me to be better and better. I'm paying so much attention to detail. I'm making sure I'm clear and concise. And I hope I'm never comfortable, because that is going to make me successful.
Crystal, I love that. I mean, that mic drop on that, embracing the discomfort with a comfortable hug, because that's what I love about what I do now, being a podcast producer. Each one of the talented hosts that I get to work with have a unique delivery for their show, right? Each and every one of them has their unique way of hosting, whether, they just have a solo podcast or it's interview style. And I'm challenged as well. Like if I take on a new podcaster who wants more than just the traditional intro, outro, body conversation edited. Like I recently had the opportunity to work with a new podcast that had multiple elements, one that really pushed my skills beyond what I've really done before. And I'm like, wow, this is like, and I agree. I was like ready to pull every single strand of my hair out because the software wasn't working right. It wasn't doing, it's like sometimes the vision in your head doesn't always come through on the computer.
Right.
And I'm still just like, I'm grateful that it all worked out. 100% gratitude. Even though in the midst of it, I'm just like, oh my God, I just want to quit. Can I just go and hide under a rock like Patrick from SpongeBob type of thing? But I made it work and I feel so much better. Like when you really push yourself through that discomfort, it's almost like you've added a new level of muscle to your everyday. And I think that's the beauty of grief, right? Grief is a wave of discomfort, of all the emotions. But I think, like what you mentioned, Crystal, when we embrace our grief instead of evading it, and use it to our advantage, we'll get to see that it's not all as bad as what society depicts it.
Hmm. Yeah, I think grief is depicted as something that is a negative. And of course, it hurts. It's painful. I've gone through devastating grief processes with families and in my personal life. It's awful. It's awful. But look, here we are. We're survivors of grief. And I have chosen, and it is a choice, I believe, that it makes me a better person, makes me a better nurse, makes me a better legal nurse consultant, makes me a better wife. Grief is something that should be embraced and not feared.
You know what? Audience clap for me, because you literally said my favorite phrase of all time: embracing grief instead of evading it. And that's why I talk about grief, my grief journey, so openly on Grew with Portia, because I want other people to not feel ashamed of what they're going through. Because let's be honest, grief can be isolating, because we
Oh, for
don't,
sure.
there's this fear of being a burden. There's this, shame of, am I continuing? I should be over this by now. But as we both know, grief has a unique timeline
Hmm.
for each person.
For each person, right. And it's interesting because when you have already grieved and you're further along in that process, it's hard to relate to those who are still in that process. I think there should always be progress in grief. I think there are times, and I know people who are stagnant in it, and then they find that comfort in grief, and that's where they want to live because they don't want to be uncomfortable. It's similar to those, people who don't want to advance their career or don't want to get uncomfortable to better themselves. It's the fear of having that discomfort. So it's important to have grace with those. It's also important to, if you're in a position of influence, to push them a little bit, to say, hey, like, it's okay to move on. It's okay to say, this isn't for me anymore.
I love that. I mean, just giving ourselves permission to say it's okay to not be okay right now, but we don't have to stay there.
Right, right.
I think grief is such a beautiful journey if we're open to seeing it and recognizing that it changes over time. That we might
It
have those
does.
moments, where we're crying, and literally I always joke about this, like sometimes when I get the ugly cries, like when I was a little kid, where like literally the snot is so thick I can tow my own car type of thing, but I feel so much better. I
Yeah.
and I think we just need to adopt a reframed mindset when it comes to grief in our world, because grief is a part of all of our journey. Grief is a part of all of our story.
Mm-hmm.
So why not learn to embrace it instead of evade it?
Absolutely. And it's interesting because when I lost my dad, it will be 11 years ago. And I was daddy's little girl. And my husband and I got married last year. And I did not realize that I was going to go through another grieving process in planning my wedding. He wasn't going to be there to walk me down the aisle. And wow, it came back with a vengeance. And thankfully, my husband's very supportive and my family was supportive. And, I made it through the day. I know I was blessed. And it was interesting to have that grief change again 10 years later. But I was happy that it did.
Congrats on the wedding, Crystal.
Thanks.
I'm sure your day was beautiful. I mean, you're in the Carolinas, so you've got the sun, you've got the beach, whatever, however you
Yeah.
celebrated your wedding, I'm sure.
And we had a tornado. But thankfully, everybody was fine. We did have a tornado warning during our wedding. So
as long as nobody, you saw them in the cyclone, like, congrats, Crystal, we're okay.
no, I think my wedding planner was really scared to tell me she would have to move everything indoors. And at this point, I was just like, I just hope everybody makes it safely. And it was beautiful. It was the perfect day.
I'm glad to hear that. I mean, and even, I mean, that'd be unique. Like a tornado on my wedding day. I wonder what that means, right? Like how they say rain on your wedding day is a good thing. I don't know about a tornado.
I think our marriage is going to be pretty epic.
Pretty solid, pretty,
Yeah.
I guess you can say infinitely strong, because if you made it through that chaos, then you can get,
Yeah,
get through anything.
absolutely.
Well,
Absolutely.
well, Crystal, I definitely want to thank you again from the bottom of my heart for coming on
Mm,
Grew Up Portia. You have shared with us so many words of wisdom and inspiration. And I truly thank you again from the bottom of my heart. You've given us the opportunity to reconnect with our faith when it
mhm,
appears that grief and life are nailing us to our own cross, to really lean into that faith in order to really be able to become victorious. Number two, leaning into our hobbies and passions, because that will help
mhm,
us to not only continue through the tough times, but also give us an outlet of finding joy and peace. And number
mhm,
three, converting our pain to purpose, right? Grief is a journey for each and every one of us. And I'm a firm believer that there's a hidden gift within our grief journey to make us better people and to be able to show up and use our story, not for just us, but to help others to stop their goals, dreams, and aspirations from making the cemetery wealthier. And so,
mhm.
Crystal,
Yes.
for our audience, can you again share your social media and website where they can connect with you and learn more about your work?
You can reach me on LinkedIn at crawfordlegalnursingconsulting.com or www.crawfordlegalnursingconsulting.com.
Excellent, Crystal. Thank you so much for sharing that again. Well, everybody, that was our legal nurse consultant, Miss Crystal Crawford, herself, that you heard from. And that concludes another episode of Grew Up Portia, season number 2. Thanks for listening, and peace and hair grease, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in to Grew with Portia. Remember to subscribe to my channel for the latest episodes. And of course, follow me on social media. You can follow me on Instagram at Portia the Producer. Anyway, guys, until we meet again, peace and hair grease.